Bone Tomahawk is a very interesting movie. It's a 2015 horror western. Yes, you did hear that correctly. And it revolves around a very small primary cast in a very simple plot. Now, what it does with the plot is good, and the performances that the cast give are also very good, despite the fact that you only spend the majority of the time with 4 people. And those 4 people, those characters, are played by Kurt Russell, Patrick Wilson, Matthew Fox, and Richard Jenkins. And for me personally, although he's not the main character in the film, the best performance given as far as I could see in this movie was actually from Richard Jenkins. He plays a completely different role in this movie to other roles that I've seen him play, and I really liked the character that he was playing. Now, it's very important to know beforehand when you go into this movie exactly what you're getting into, because this movie is known as being gory and intense, as I said, a horror western, and westerns do give a lot of opportunity for legitimate horror. This movie, though, is not what I was expecting when I went into it. I was expecting non-stop action, gore all over the place, not necessarily something on the level of Hostel, but something with plenty of gore, plenty of action, basically all the way through. That is not what this film gives you. In fact, it's almost the exact opposite. This film is an extremely slow burn. You spend the vast majority of the time in the film with the 4 primary characters riding horses. Now, they're not doing that for the fun of it. The movie revolves around a very simple plot of a rescue mission. That's it. There's really nothing more to it. It's a very simple story, and it works with what it's got. But due to the nature of that, you just spend the majority of the film on the way to rescuing these people. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's just very important to know that when you go into this film, because otherwise you'll be expecting a very different movie to what you actually get. Now, that being said, there is action, there is most definitely gore, especially towards the end of the film, and for those who are wanting that, you do get some. Just not as much as some of the rumours about the film could indicate. Now, as far as the ratings I would personally give this film, first of all, as always, we have the story and the plot. As I said, it's very, very simple, the story and plot overall. It does what it needs to do to further that simple plot very well, I would say, and although it is a very slow burn, and although it is a rescue mission, it's more of a character-driven film than a story-driven film. So overall, I'm going to give it a 6 for story and plot, and the reason for that is because it is very simple, but it does well with the story that it's got to work with. At the same time, though, the burn for me personally was a little bit too slow at times. There were definitely periods in the film, sometimes large periods, where I was expecting more to be happening and it just doesn't. It is a very slow burn, especially in a film that is over 2 hours long. So overall, it's definitely not bad for story and plot, but I would have liked a little more. Now, if that meant that it was a longer film, it could have potentially still been worth that, but it wasn't. Now, as far as the next category that we have, that is of course the characters and their motivations. And for the characters and their motivations, I'm going to give the film an 8, because as I mentioned earlier on, this is very much a character-driven movie rather than a story-driven one, and as such, the characters need to be good. Now, when you've got the actors who are in this film, you are pretty much always guaranteed to have well-portrayed characters. Now, that being said, although I am rating it high at 8 out of 10 for the characters and the motivations that they have, they are easy to root for, they are interesting, they are well portrayed, and they are easy to support and back and root for. That being said, I do have one issue with the characters, and that is that they are good and they are interesting, but things are alluded to with the characters that then aren't really paid off on. You're not given very much backstory into many of them. You get the now, but you don't get why they are the way they are. Now, again, the film could be endlessly long if they went into every single character completely, but a little bit more flesh to the characters would have been nice. Overall though, I like the way they were portrayed, and as I said, they are easy to root for. Next up we have the visuals and effects, and for the visuals and effects I'm going to give Bone Tomahawk a 9, because although the visuals and special effects in particular are very few and far between, far more so than you'd probably assume going into the movie, when they are used, they are good. The majority of them, if not all of them, are practical effects, and they look great. The gore is very good, and you get what you expect to get when the gore does happen. It's a good quality gore, if you're into that. So overall, it's a 9. The reason why it's not a 10 is because there's so little of it in comparison to the runtime of the whole film. You don't necessarily want a gore fest, as I said. This isn't Hostel, this isn't Saw, but a little more wouldn't necessarily have hurt the film. Now next up we have the audio, the soundtrack, the audio in general, and for that I'm going to give the film a 7, because the soundtrack, the sound quality, the sound design, in general, being a newer film, not surprisingly, it's very good. That being said, I didn't personally find the music overly memorable. The sound design, although good, doesn't necessarily have much room to work with, because the majority of the time you're just listening to the sounds of the wind, horses, and some guys talking to each other, so there's not really that much for the sound to be doing, as it were. So overall for that, I'm giving it a 7. And finally we have, of course, the most subjective, to me personally, the rewatchability and entertainment factor. And for that I'm going to give Bone Tomahawk a 7. And the reason why I'm giving it a 7 is because it is definitely the kind of film which, if you enjoyed it, of course, you'll want to watch it again. That being said, the reason why I'm not making it higher is because it's such a slow burn that once you've watched it through once and you know everything that's going to happen, it can feel like it's dragging a lot more the second time around. That's not necessarily going to affect everyone, but it can affect some. So overall, as a tabulation of all of the scores put together, I'm giving Bone Tomahawk a rating of 3.7 out of 5, which isn't necessarily as high as I would have liked to have given it. Kurt Russell is one of my favourite actors. I love westerns, I love gore. The building blocks that this film had to work with could have been phenomenal. This could have been a really, really highly rated movie for me personally. But overall, I think primarily the pace of the film is such a slow burn that does affect it a little. I like movies that are a slow burn, that develop their story. Don't get me wrong, I don't think this is a bad or a boring film. It's just not the kind of film that would usually have that kind of pace, and as such, on your first viewing at least, that can really throw you off, and it did for me personally. Overall though, I definitely consider this to be a good film. It's just a little bit more niched than I was expecting. If you're a certain type of viewer, you will love this movie. If you are not that type of viewer, you won't hate the film, you just won't necessarily want to watch it again. Overall though, I would definitely recommend checking out Bone Tomahawk and support the film, because financially it did not do very well at all at the box office, less than $250,000, and that really is a travesty considering how much better than so many other films this is, films that made more money, especially in the horror genre. Overall, it's a critically acclaimed film that didn't get the buzz that it deserves, but definitely check it out. But that's it for this particular review, and if you have already seen this movie, I'd love to, of course, hear your thoughts about it down below. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.